Good morning. Welcome to MS There's Hope. This morning we will be talking with Dr. John Zvonovich, who's a therapist at Legacy Counseling Services in Colorado. We will be dealing with stress today, and he'll give us maybe a few tools that he's learned over the years to help people combat stress. Before we get into the interview, though, I'm going to give a short disclaimer on mental health, and then we'll jump right into the interview. This interview addresses chronic disease and some stresses or mental health dilemmas that can be encountered by combating it. We are not giving advice or addressing specific cases, but are speaking more in general about some of the issues that may be incurred, which we've seen and experienced. Difficulties and methods of treating them can vary significantly per individual. For this reason, we strongly recommend that anyone seeking treatment consult with a licensed medical or mental professional. Good morning, John, and thank you so much for doing this with us. John and I were raised in the same county, and so we go way back. I hope he didn't guess me.
Yeah.
Good morning, John.
Morning.
Dr. John, I should say.
Yeah, well, it's okay.
So tell us how we combat stress.
Well, one of the things that we need to remember regarding stress, and I want to talk about stress that kind of leads to anxiety, because everybody deals with stress, right? When we feel like we're in, the vice a little bit, or we're pressured, we got to meet a deadline and we haven't been necessarily working ahead. So everybody deals with stress. But one of the things that we need to be mindful of when stress comes is it releases this chemical in our body, one of our, chemicals, and that we have several, it's cortisol. Cortisol can have a real negative effect on our body. So if we're in a stressful situation frequently, we find ourselves in stressful situations, we need to be mindful that cortisol is kind of coursing through our system. It really has some negative impacts on us physiologically. Go ahead.
Let me interject something while you're talking about that. What we tell people when we start this whole process of combating the disease is the number one thing is combating stress. It's not a physical or a supplement or a diet or anything like that. You have to get control of your stress because that will affect your health more than anything. Go ahead.
Sure. I mean, and there's simple things to help yourself with stress, like trying to plan ahead, thinking through, addressing negative self-talk. And we'll talk about some of those things. But I mean, stress, you just need to realize everybody deals with stress. Anxiety now is a deeper level. I mean, it's stress kind of like on steroids, right? It's so much more detailed. People can begin to have shallowness of breath, because what happens physiologically in anxiety, this is kind of fascinating, is the body basically says run. So what happens is you may feel like, when you're feeling anxious, you may feel like you need to go to the restroom and kind of evacuate your bladder or your bowels or whatever, because your body's getting ready to run. You may find yourself breathing, like shallow breathing, fast breathing, all because your body's saying, let's run. Your veins constrict, all these different things take place when you're feeling anxious. And so anxiety is different than stress. Stress is something we all face. Not everybody faces anxiety, but a lot of people that, have to deal with chronic illness find themselves addressing anxiety. Why? Because it's been stressed for so long, it's gone into another dimension. And so I'm not saying everybody that, that deals with physiological issues, deals with anxiety, but there's plenty that do. And so what we want to do is just kind of give you some practical, simple ways to be able to kind of address anxiety. Now, again, stress is one thing, and you can plan, sleeping well, if you can sleep, eating well. I mean, there's just things that you can do to help eliminate the stress. You can't eliminate somebody else causing you stress, right? For example, somebody's comments or whatever, and you're like, oh wow, that was stressful. But what you can do is you can really control how you respond to it. And but that's stress. So there's a myriad of ways to do that. You can Google stress, you can Google anxiety, whatever. But you want to be mindful of stress is different than anxiety. Anxiety starts getting into mental health concerns. There's things that your brain does. Like, for example, what happens is your amygdala, I know this will be a little technical, but your amygdala is kind of where your ear and your eye meet on both sides, and they're like an almond shaped part of your brain. The amygdala doesn't interpret, it just responds. Like, for example, when you see something out of your corner of your eye, you ever do this? Well, why did you do that? Well, your amygdala, it didn't. Your cortex goes, oh, wait a minute, that wasn't coming at me. Your cortex, the bigger part of your brain, right? You know, I mean, and again, it's kind of all together, but the bigger part of your brain has to interpret it. But a lot of times when anxiety happens, panic attacks, it's your amygdala's kind of taken over. You're just responding. Somebody said something, or you're not feeling a certain way, and you're thinking, and then all of a sudden you get to a place where it's kind of like diving off of a cliff into water. You're like, what? And then you just get to this place where you start panicking, people sweat. There's a myriad of different ways that you can kind of, you get cloudy and really foggy in your thinking because you're shallow breathing, you're not getting in a lot of oxygen. What happens when you begin to shallow breathe? Your brain begins to shut down kind of from the back forward. Well, and again, and I'm going to use back to forward, but your brain is far more complex than that. That's a simplistic view. But what happens, it leaves you in the fight, flight, freak, or freeze zone. Flight is you want to leave. Fight is you want to turn and fight. Freak out is people, I've just seen people like melt, just like, and freeze is people like do this, because you're just sure not what to do, right? And when you get to there, that could be, clear signs of anxiety, but that's usually your amygdala.
I want to interject something there that happened to me that goes right along with this and anxiety attacks. I used to sit in the sauna at gym. Heat affects MS sufferers probably worse than anything.
Oh,
We
wow.
don't have insulation on our nerves. So therefore, when we heat up the nerve, and it causes things in the body to happen. And so I would get in the sauna at the gym, go in the shower, take a warm shower, and walk outside and have an anxiety attack. And it was because physically something was happening and I didn't know what. I just knew how I felt and how it was making me feel. So I would have these anxiety attacks. And once I'd learned what was causing that, it stopped the anxiety attacks. Go ahead.
Oh, that's a great insight. See, and that's where there's nuances of like anxiety. If you have MS, or if you have depression, or there's just different kind of slices of, the kind of pie and the way it gets played out. And so you want to be mindful of other, kind of comorbid issues that you're dealing with. Comorbidity is a popular word now because of COVID, right? They had COVID, but they actually died of cancer, but they had the comorbidity of COVID. So sometimes it's like it's claimed as COVID, sometimes it gets, but comorbidity means there's other things going along with it. So it's the anxiety rarely is just by itself. Depression is rarely just by itself. There may be sad, all these emotions. Anxiety helps push you into depression. Usually there's comorbidities with, mental health concerns. And so you need to be mindful of that. But that was a really good insight, John, that you shared, because you understand that.
It was hell to go through because I would have an anxiety attack, go to the emergency room, they'd say, nothing's wrong with you. You just had an anxiety attack. And the day I got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, my wife said to me, you're happy, aren't you? And I said, you doggone right I am. Now I have a name to go along with how I was feeling.
Right.
So,
That's
but I had terrible, terrible anxiety attacks until then, but I got through them. You get through them. There is a saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. There's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. And so,
It either makes you stronger or puts you in a coma, I always say.
or debilitates the crap out of you.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Again, once again, it's several ways it could play out. But I'm going to give you 4 kind of practical things that you can do if you ever find yourself anxious. Now, again, they can apply to stress, but it's really talking about anxiety, right? And how to be able to, and I'll kind of help you understand, the difference. The first one that I'd like to share with you is muscle relaxation. I remember in grade school, I don't think we did it in high school, but where you like tense up a part of your body, you like your arms, you'd hold it for 5 seconds and then you kind of release it. You kind of do that a few times. You do your feet, your calves, your thighs, your buttocks, your back, you just kind of work through your muscle groups. And that is a way to begin to relax your body, because in anxiety, we have a tendency to kind of get locked down. We're not breathing, oxygen's not getting to our body. And so we have a tendency to start locking down. And so what we're doing is we're just kind of opening back up, right? Muscle relaxation is the first one. Second one is awareness. And so for some people, it's just literally pausing. What I like to do in becoming aware is kind of close my eyes, because I'm borderline ADD, right? So it's like, squirrel. Did I see a squirrel? All over the place. So what I'll do is close my eyes and I just listen. Maybe listen to my breath, listen to the wind, the clock click. And I just kind of focus on that and what's happening. I'm very present and aware of what's happening in the sounds around me. I'm not looking, because that for me is very distracting. You can look. For some people, awareness is the ability to focus on something. That's fine. But for me, it's
Sometimes when I'm coaching people or dealing with people, they're too aware. And by that, I mean
uh,
everything is MS.
yeah,
I have a backache. Is that MS? I have a knee ache. Is that MS? They're aware of all these symptoms. They're so aware of their bodies that
yeah,
everything goes back to MS. And I tell people, as we um, get further along with the protocol and the disease kind of goes into remission, you become less and less aware
sure.
of stuff. But not that you don't need to be aware, but sometimes people are too aware.
Right.
And anyway, go ahead with what you said. I
No,
don't want to.
no, that's kind of funny, because I think part of awareness is getting older. Like, when's the last time you've been around a group of 60, 70, 80-year-olds where somebody's not talking about some knee replacement, I mean, whatever. It's just
Yeah.
we're aware of our bodies so much, because they just hurt differently now that we're older than when we were younger, right? So
Yes.
so in this case, if you're kind of really aware of yourself, become aware of something outside of you, like the sound, birds, a clock, whatever. It's kind of not overwhelmingly thinking about yourself, because that may not be leading you in a good direction, but you're listening to the birds or whatever, something outside of you. That would be awareness. A third thing is confronting negative thoughts. Toxic shame, fears and insecurities are real issues that most people deal with. Now, again, we're not going to get into all of it, because when I do therapy with individuals and couples, we unpack all that, because there's just a lot there. But what we tell ourselves, the self-talk, like, you're stupid, that was dumb, why you're such an idiot, you're no good, and you deserve this disease, or you're what, whoa. All right. So one of the way to address negative self-talk is not positive. I'm the best person in the world. I'm so wonderful. No, let's not lie, because then that
Yeah.
becomes, no, we want to address it with truth. Like, for example, I forgot, to meet somebody for lunch. I just totally brained out and forgot it. And I began to get a little negative with myself. And I went, wait a minute. I forgot to have lunch. Call and apologize and reschedule. There's a way to be able to fix it. I forget sometimes, admit it, own it, and then reschedule. And that's what I did. It called me. He said, no problem. Then we met again, at Jersey Mike's sub shop. And I'm not, but I'm just saying they're beautiful subs, and we just had a wonderful lunch, right? But if I would have allowed myself to be negative, it's so detrimental, because what it does is it's kind of like digging your own hole. You just kind of keep digging, good. And then what'll happen is then we counteract the negative thoughts with all this, like, I got it all figured out. I got it all together. Well, that's false. That's not true. Because if you really expose the truth of who you were in your negativity, it'd be pretty ugly. So what we do is we overcompensate. So, like, for example, have you ever seen somebody that's very prideful? When I meet people like that, I just kind of smile and go, man, super insecure, got a lot of fears, toxic shame. Why? Because they're overcompensating. No, humility is an accurate view of oneself. Pride is an inflated view. False humility is a deflated view. See, we don't want to have a deflated view. That's just as egregious as an inflated view. We want to have an accurate view. We know our strengths, our weaknesses. We know how to be able to work through that, but we're employing truth to be able to balance out the negativity in our life. Because again,
I want to interject something because it
sure.
just reminded me of this. My old roommate used to say in the 60s, they say, I'm okay, you're okay, and that's okay. He said, the truth is, I'm screwed up, you're screwed up, but that's okay. And
Yeah.
that's the way I think you got to look at it. Everybody's screwed up. And not to think too much or too lowly of yourself, but just that you're like everybody else.
Yeah, and when I work with my clients, we kind of establish this baseline, and I've never had pushback. The baseline is we're all broken. We all
Yeah.
have issues. How does our brokenness get played out? It's just different. That's why being judgmental is really a joke, because so you're condemning somebody else for their brokenness, but you're not looking at your own brokenness. That's what makes you a hypocrite. And that makes you judgmental, because you're going, oh, can you believe they did that? Well, look, okay, liar, be honest with yourself. So what you want to do is you want to have a balanced perspective. We're all broken. It just gets played out in different ways. And so it's really easy to be judgmental, critical, harsh on people. No, well, wait a minute. For example, chronic disease. Well, I wonder why you deserve that. Oh, what? People are goofy, because it's different. Anytime anything's different, we have a tendency to not understand it, and we'll make fun, we'll proverbial throw rocks at it, whatever, because it's different than us, and so it's just silly.
People try to explain chronic disease all the time, and I'm like, you can't explain it. I'm like, you have it, deal with it. That's
Yeah.
that's what it comes down to,
But
There's
as you're dealing with it, what you want to do is you want to really mitigate for the negative toxic thinking. Like, I deserve this, I did something wrong, I'm being punished. I mean, well, okay, that may not be true at all, And so what's the truth? And I like what you said, you have it. Now, what do we do? How do we live to our fullest in the midst of whatever the debilitating disease may be, whatever your brokenness plays out? How do we live with that? How do we deal with that? How do we still thrive as human being in the context of our brokenness and in the context of like a chronic disease or whatever it may be? So that's where we got to balance it with truth. Okay. And then the last one I want to address is breathing, which, by the way, seems so kind of funny, like breathing. Really? That helps with anxiety. Well, this is funny. I've had clients come into my office and they will literally be having a panic attack because the office is smaller. So maybe they're claustrophobic or whatever. So they'll start, panic attack, and then, they'll get a bag out and all that. And so what I do is I literally model for them. I sit up, I make sure I'm sitting up. I put my hands on, my lap, and I said, okay, breathe with me. And what we do is take breath in 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, out in 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you do that, and it's not long, usually a minute or two, and the client is no longer having a panic attack. Because what happens is your breathing gets out of control, and it literally exacerbates. It doesn't make it better. It's kind of like throwing gas on a bonfire, because you're trying to get more oxygen. Well, no, just take deep breaths. Here's what happens physiologically, which is kind of a cool thing. The vagus nerve is probably the longest nerve system in our body. It goes from our brain, goes through our organs, all that kind of cool stuff, right? It's really complex now. But when we deep breathe, our stomach and our diaphragm kind of soothes and massages the vagus nerve. It's hilarious. Which, by the way, the vagus nerve goes to the brain, goes to the amygdala, and what you're doing is you're literally self-soothing by just breathing. And it's very good, because here's another thing you're doing is you're getting more oxygen to your brain and to your body, not less, because you're your full deep chest breathe in 4, out in 6. I had a friend of mine tell me he's an athlete, and he was having a boxing match. In order to be calm, because the crowd and all that, he was doing what they call boxing breathing. And it's box. You breathe in on 4, you exhale on 4. You breathe in on 4, you exhale on 4. You breathe in on 4, you exhale. It's kind of like you do it. And he goes, it just calms you down to be able to, the fans are all excited, and you can just kind of get worked up in that. And he goes, but you got to be calm in order to, he's a big dude, like 6'8", all that. He was having a boxing.
I have written in my notes pieces of advice from a 93-year-old woman. And
Wow.
one of the pieces of advice was take a deep breath. It's very relaxing. Every time I read that, I always take a deep breath and let it out. And it is so true.
Right.
It is so true. It relaxes you so much to take a deep breath.
Now with anxiety, it's going to be, I'm going to take that a little separate. Take deep breaths, plural, because
Yes.
what you're going to need to do is,
Yes.
Usually, not always, but usually, if you can begin to control your breathing, in 4, out 6, in 4, out 4, out,
Yes.
in 8, out 8, whatever you decide to do, if you can do that, usually you will kind of self-soothe and you will calm
Yes.
down in a minute or two. Sometimes it may take 3 to 5 minutes. But I had one client one time, this was years ago, that had a general anxiety disorder. Okay. So, I mean, he was anxious about everything. And so he would come in my office and he would make me anxious. Yeah, I know. I felt bad for him. I mean, he was like little. And the first thing we would do at the beginning of every one of our sessions is just to calm him down. And I'd say, okay, I talk real calm, and I'd say, all right, let's go ahead. I understand. So, put your hands in, let's deep breathe, just quiet, close your eyes. And so he could kind of focus. He wasn't looking at me because I didn't want him to feel embarrassed. I just wanted him to, and he would kind of calm down. And I said, so tell me once he was calm, tell me what's going on. And he would, but the whole session, I had to be very calm, because anything could trigger him. Right. And then next thing you know, that's kind of general anxiety disorder. So, anything could trigger him. So I just had to be really calm with him throughout. And it really was profitable. I mean, not only for me, but for him as well. I mean, it was fascinating. And that breathing stuff, it's simple, it's free, it doesn't go, but I'm telling you, it's pretty incredible what it can do for you.
Yes. And I think it was Tony Robbins or somebody a few years ago was talking about how they take a breath in. I think they count to 40 or something, and then they blow it out to 40. And I walk into my wife's grandmother's room. She lived to be 97, by the way.
Wow.
And she's in there doing the exercise. She doesn't even know that he said anything about it. I said, why do you do that? And she was like, oh, several years ago, I knew it was good for my lungs and good for relaxation. And it is. I do exercises for my lungs because this COVID thing attacking your lungs, having strong lungs is good, but it also relaxes you is why I do it.
Yeah. So the 4 things simple, there's a lot more. Again, you can Google, you can look, you can research, you can find out. And the whole thing is, just because you find out information, that's great. The best thing you can do, one of the things about neuroscience that I really enjoy about the study of the brain, is you've got to be in it a little bit, not anxious, having a panic attack. That may not be a good time to employ it, but you begin to find yourself getting anxious. That's when you want to step in and begin to change the way you would normally respond by going to a panic attack. No, what you do is you start controlling your breathing. You start doing your muscle relaxation, protocols, whatever. And so that's the time. But for us talking about it, and if you're watching this blog and you go, oh, that's a nice it's a nice concept, but it needs to be actionable. So anything you read, learn about anxiety, make sure it's actionable. What can I put into play? And before you get headlong into your anxiety, as you begin down that road, just as soon as you turn off the gravel road onto another gravel road, it's called anxiety. That's when you want to start employing some of that, because you're in it a little bit in your brain. This is called neuroplasticity. Your brain begins to change. You're beginning to change the way our brain has these things called neural pathways. I like to call them neural ruts. We get into ruts. That's why, we can drive someplace and I don't know how I got here, but I just know, because you've driven there 150 times, right? It's just we kind of do that, right? So what we're doing is we're getting out of a rut and creating a new pathway, a healthy pathway. So whatever you do. So the 4 are muscle relaxation, awareness, confronting negative thoughts with truthful thoughts, and breathing.
What you were saying there, I remember years ago, this is back in the late 80s, early 90s, a guy was talking about how the seams in your brain were avenues upon where thoughts travel. And he said that that when you change the ways of thinking, that you develop new pathways. And that's what, in a way, what John was talking about here, and what you need to do is, and what we do with MS is, you get MS, you get the diagnosis, and they say, there is no cure. So you can go home and say, there is no cure. I'm going to get worse. You can just dwell on the negative, or you can pick something positive and dwell on that. And I tell people all the time, the way to get through this is not focusing on yourself, focusing on somebody else, because you've got problems, and it doesn't diminish your problems by focusing on somebody else's problems. It just means they got problems too, and you can relate. It's not going to diminish your problems, but what it does is you cannot try to do this. Try to think of 2 things at once. You can't do it. So if you're busy thinking about somebody else, you don't have time to worry about yourself, become anxious about yourself, become stressed about yourself, because you're busy worrying about them, or not worrying, but you know what I mean. Anyway, I think a squirrel ran by, John, and I have ADD too, so we ought to have some great conversations.
Oh my goodness. Well, John, I just want to say, and again, you and I reconnected some years back, after going to the same high school and all that kind of fun stuff. And I knew your older brother probably better than you, but still knew you and all that. And you're like one of my heroes because of the attitude you have in the midst of your chronic disease. There is no cure. All of those things, but you choose to live differently. You're doing this video blog post, blog, all that fun stuff. I'm just so impressed with you. You're doing a great job. I couldn't be more.
Thank you, but I have to give all credit to a gentleman by the name of Charles Wiedemeyer. Charles Wiedemeyer got ALS and ended up in a wheelchair. And I'm a Christian. He came to my church in 1989 or 90, and all he could move was his lips. And his wife stood there, read his lips, and preached. And here's this guy, he could be facing death. He can't move a muscle but his lips, and he's still doing this. And so he was my inspiration.
Oh, okay, great.
To do all this.
We all need some inspiration, man.
Yeah, we all need some. Dr. John, thank you so much for being with us today. I'd like to do this every so often. If you're available, I'd appreciate it. And people can submit questions to me, and questions will not be answered on an individual basis. There's just no way, people. There's just too many thousands of people. I tell people that all the time with doing the medical side. But if you submit a question, it might be something that we'll cover down the road.
Sure.
And it might be something for us to think about, and it might be a good topic for us. So anyway, John, thank you so much, Dr. John, I should say.
No
And
problem.
and I look forward to interviewing you again coming up soon. We'll have to talk about that. And people, I want you to give your input and your encouragement to Dr. John too to do this, because I really want more times like this, so that we can, we don't get paid a cent for this. It's just so that we can help people. So hopefully this helps somebody, and we'll do it again. All right, John.
Sounds good.
Thank you, buddy.